Okay, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining us once again for our monthly Lunch and Learn series. I'm Josh Haas, Vice Chair for the Hawk Migration Association of North America, and we're really excited this month to be welcoming Daena Ford from the Braddock Bay Raptor Research migration site, which is a long-standing HMANA partner. So we're really excited that she was willing to present for us today, and you're in for a real treat. So before we get to that, I do want to again welcome everybody and just provide a few administrative things before we get started. First of which, dealing with Zoom, if you are interested in changing the view, just to make sure you have a nice view of Daena's slideshow, make sure you navigate to the upper right-hand corner where it says View in your Zoom window, and you can play around with either standard side-by-side speaker or gallery to tune that view to exactly how it looks best for you. Just as a reminder, we have everybody muted without the ability to unmute yourself, so you will not be able to unmute. However, we do still ask that you engage with us, and the way that we ask that you engage is through the chat. So make sure to scroll to the bottom of your Zoom window and pop open that chat, and feel free to say hello, tell us where you're dialing in from, and as the presentation's going on, post your questions there. Our staff member, Julie Brown, will be monitoring that chat, and after Daena's talk ends, the questions and answer time will be facilitated by Julie. So please connect with us, talk to us, ask questions through the chat. We have opened the chat so that you can chat privately with others or to the entire group. So keep in mind, you'll be able to see, everybody will be able to see those chats unless you specifically chat with someone privately. We are recording this, and we'll make this available on our HMANA news page within the HMANA.org website. So please keep that in mind as the chats are recorded as well. With that being said, I think I'll turn it over to the famous Julie Brown, who will introduce this month's speaker. Julie.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. I am Julie Brown, Monitoring Site Coordinator for HMANA, and welcome. And happy International Hawk Migration Week to everybody. That is an event that HMANA started a few years back just to celebrate migration, fall migration, and all the sites in the monitoring network. So from September 18th through the 26th, I hope you get out and share hawk watching, go hawk watching, share it with others, and just enjoy the spectacle. So I'm really excited to introduce Daena today. Daena currently lives in Honeoye Falls, New York, near Rochester, with her husband, her 2 teenage children, and 2 dogs. She has a BS in biology and her master's in secondary science education. She's been working with Braddock Bay Raptor Research for almost 30 years and has been the president for almost 20. And starting out as a college intern, she quickly became hooked on raptors after witnessing the amazing spectacle of spring migration that occurs along the south shore of Lake Ontario. She has worked with raptors in both research and educational settings, both of which help the community learn more about the birds and the environment we share with them. Daena's education work with raptors early on led her into the classroom, where she taught middle school science for 6 years. She currently holds education permits to care for 4 non-releasable raptors, which are used in programs conducted on-site at Braddock Bay and throughout the community. She's also served on the board of directors for HMANA from 2010 to 2018. That's where I've gotten to know Daena, working closely with her for many years, which was great. So if you've never been to Braddock Bay, I highly recommend going. It's such an exciting place to be there, just to be there in the spring. It's always teeming with migration, and they just do a really great job with their migration, their banding, all their education. So today we're going to hear a bit more about the site and just the fascinating phenomenon of the red-tailed Natal Dispersal that they've been studying for so many years. So welcome, Daena.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm Josh and all of HMANA. I'm excited to be here and share with you A little different topic that I'm used to sharing because Braddock Bay is a spring site normally, but we do have this really unique, incredible natal dispersal that happens in the summer. So this talk will be focused mostly on that, of course, and the few things that we've learned over the years and what we were hoping to continue learning. Let's see. Wake up my computer here. Having trouble. My slides aren't advancing.
So you may have to take your cursor and click on your slides away from Zoom. Did you try that yet?
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right, sorry about that. So a little bit about Braddock Bay Raptor Research as an organization. We are a small nonprofit, primarily all volunteers except for our spring counter, which we do hire for the entire spring season. We were founded back in 1986. And so we've been working to study the birds, study the raptor migration, share the scientific information, the data that we collect with the community, and also education is a huge component of our mission too, both in the surrounding community and expanding outward across the continent. Most people who are familiar with Braddock Bay Raptor Research and Braddock Bay itself know it as a hawkwatch, a spring hawkwatch site. And its history is pretty long. And the first hawk counts really were documented back in the late 40s and 50s. But official counts like you are used to seeing now with weather data and hourly tallies were really started back in 1977 by the Moons. A little bit later on, the Dodges, Jeff and Joan and Richard Mather founded Braddock Bay Raptor Research, and we've been monitoring the raptor migration ever since. So our spring site is one of the best in North America, and we average about 50,000 plus raptors during the months of March through May. This is a view of our platform, which is very accessible to the public. So if you do get a chance to visit us, it's really an easy site to go to. You just hop off the Lake Ontario State Parkway, go to the town of Greece Park, Braddock Bay Park, park your car and walk a nice leisurely stroll out to the platform. So it's a great way to spend a spring day. Here's a little hawk's eye view, so to speak, of what the Hawkwatch site looks like. And this is kind of a late spring, early summer view, everything nice and green. Of course, in the spring, early spring, it's a little more brown and trees are a little bare, but this is how we see it as we're gearing into our summer raptor count a little bit later in August. For a little bit of lay of the land from the platform, we are located right on the southern shore of Lake Ontario. So the lake is out in the distance here. And Braddock Bay proper is right about the middle of the screen here. It's fed by two creeks on either side of the marsh there. And so we have a lot of great habitat around. It's not just a bare spot where you watch hawks, a lot of wetlands, some uplands, some forested areas, some meadows and fields. So a good variety of habitat to attract all kinds of birds, not just raptors in the spring. So why do we get so many raptors? Just to kind of give you an idea of the lay of the land here. And as you know, most of you might know, if you're familiar with any of the mechanics of hawk migration, these birds are relying on thermals or updrafts to help them save energy. Great Lakes, like Lake Ontario, are kind of a barrier when they're traveling in a northerly direction in the springtime, heading to their breeding grounds. So as birds are coming from the south in the spring, and we get a good southerly winds, it's going to push them up close to the lake shore. Instinctively, they know to go around that cold body of water and follow the land looking for thermals. And so generally speaking, we get a good flight coming from the west to the east, up and around the eastern end of Lake Ontario. Braddock Bay is right about in the middle where the city of Rochester is. And if we zoom in a little bit closer, there's Rochester, New York. And Braddock Bay is at this letter A here. And you can see that the shoreline takes a little turn to the southeast here, creating an even tighter concentration point for any birds that are traveling from the west or coming straight up from the south. So this is the lay of the land, the weather, the winds are what bring us so many birds in the spring as well as in the summer for natal dispersal, which I'll get to in just a little bit. Braddock Bay is part of the Braddock Bay Wildlife Management Area, which most of it is managed by the New York State DEC, but it's also a cooperation of neighboring park townships, both Greece and Parma, which are in Monroe County, New York. And it encompasses, I think at this point, it's over 2,600 acres in the management area. And all in this map just shows that how important the habitat is to be preserved around here. As you know, lakeshore property anywhere is a hot commodity. So there's a lot of development in the area as well, residential mainly. So protection of these lands, the marshes, the uplands and such is crucial to helping this place be a great stopover for migrating birds of all kinds. Okay. So today's featured species really is the red-tailed hawk, because we're seeing in the late summer after breeding season, just thousands of these birds that have been kicked off their nesting territories by their parents wandering around in the late summer months. Red tails are mainly what we see during natal dispersal at Braddock Bay. Many people are familiar with the red-tailed hawk. It's one of our most common North American raptors, found all over the continent. Here in the East is a typical view of what an adult bird looks like and how they've gotten their name, known for that reddish-brown tail as adult birds there. So a common sight just about year-round, especially in our area of the Northeast, but also a migrant in the spring and the fall for those of you watching hawks now. But not all red-tailed hawks have a red tail. And so this is our main focus are the juveniles and the immature birds that we see at the end of nesting season. So an immature red-tailed hawk is not going to have a red tail. They have that lovely banded tail. So a sight from underneath, you can see the banding in the tail, and on top side, this was a bird on the right that had been captured in one of our banding stations during the summer months there. So I'm actually going to get into some of the banding research we did as well and talk about how this relates to natal dispersal of red-tailed hawks. What does natal dispersal mean? For some, that may be an intimidating term for you, but really it's just a description of how some animals will move permanently away from their birth site. In our case, it's their hatch site. So we have at this end of the nesting season, a lot of younger birds around that have gotten a little less some life lessons from their parents, but they don't stay on territory with them all the time, and they must go off on their own. Just like we often have to send our own children off to college or out into the real world. They can't live at home forever. So it's the end of the summer where these birds are wandering and trying to figure out where they're going to end up. And in some cases, some of these red tails are going to choose to migrate south. And you'll see that in some of our banding results. Some of them wander north for a bit. So we know that this is not the same as fall migration. This isn't the beginning of fall migration at our site. We can start to see natal dispersal as early as mid-July, really. So it's a time period that takes place for many of these birds before migration instinct is kicking in, if they choose to do so, as far as a fall migration southward. We see great numbers of birds in similar conditions that we see during the spring season for spring migration. So southerly winds are what pushing them up towards the lakeshore. So these birds are really initially kind of heading from the west and from the south and just getting pushed towards the lakeshore on those southerly or westerly winds. And really, we're seeing the flights primarily during the month of August, although sometimes, as I mentioned, can start as early as mid-July, and it actually can go into mid to late September. We see a few stragglers coming through. But we do not get a fall migration of raptors at Braddock Bay at all. There's other birds that are migrating through, but we're not a fall site. They tend to go around Lake Ontario in different directions and never really make it our way. And they're not crossing the lake to get to us. So I know the title of the program is called Summer Raptor Count, and I will definitely be getting to that, but I thought it would be important to kind of give you a little history and talk to you about how much we've done all in the past with banding these birds. That's really had been the main focus of our natal dispersal research for a long time. We've been banding raptors at Braddock Bay for 37 years now. And in terms of red-tailed hawks specifically, for all months, both spring and summer, we have banded over 13,000 red-tailed hawks. Banding at Braddock Bay started a couple years before BBRR was incorporated by Clay Taylor, who started the Rochester Hawk Banding Project. So, and summer banding of red-tails didn't really start until 1988. But the majority of those red-tailed hawks, as I mentioned before, over 13,000 that have been banded at Braddock Bay, the majority of them, over 10,000, have taken place during that natal dispersal time period. So during the months July to just about the beginning of October. So with all this information, all these banded birds out there, all these young birds, it's a great opportunity to take a look at and try to answer some of the questions like where are these birds going to, what causes of mortality are they experiencing, and all kinds of things. So a couple of years ago, I took a look at our data set on all the red tails that had been banded during those months, July to October, since 1988 to 2018. So about 30 years worth of information. First of all, it's fun to look at. It's interesting to see the numbers, the total number of banded red tails we've captured over the years and how much it varies. So we've banded as many as close to 1,000 in a single season, summer season. And of course, there's some numbers that are quite low. I don't want you to be alarmed by this though, because this really is just a documentation of how many we've banded and not really related to population in any way, because a lot of factors go into how many birds you can band. Some of it is really purely availability of banders. We had a lot more availability back in the 90s and the early 2000s than we do now. And we actually had as many as 3 banding stations run during that time. Currently, we have 2 that operate. So there's that human factor that goes into the variety or the variation of the numbers for totals over the year. It also can depend on how many birds are coming through too, though. So, but we can't get a really clear documentation of what the flight was when you look at just the number of birds banded. But it is interesting to see the possibility and the magnitude. It's one way of representing the magnitude of how many birds are in the area during that time of year. Of course, when you're banding birds, it's all about the encounters. You want them to show up again. You want to get some information. That's why they wear that band, so someone can turn the number in and get an idea of what this bird has been doing in its life. So a little background, little terminology for you. So when we're talking here about banding encounters, an encounter is any handling of a banded bird since its initial banding. So it could be a dead or a live bird. Sometimes these birds show up in other banding stations and we also capture some birds that are previously banded. So that's always really exciting. And then you can report the band and find out where it came from. But a lot of the encounters are usually from dead birds that for a variety of reasons. Looking at the encounter rates, or how often these birds show up and get reported after initial banding. Just to give you an idea, raptors are a little bit higher than songbirds. They're a little bit more visible, they're easier to find, so that makes a lot of sense. So about a 3.4 return rate. Keep that number in mind later on. Passerines for songbirds is about 1.3% of all the birds that are banded ever show up again. For ducks and other waterfowl, the return rate is a little higher because you have more people encountering a lot of for waterfowl hunting season in particularly. Okay, so we're going to be looking at all of our returns, which is either a recapture or resighting of a banded bird that's away from the site. It was initially banded at a different time of year. So I took 30 years of red-tailed hawk bands that were put on those birds and inquired through the banding laboratory, had them give me the data set of all the birds that had ever been banded, all the red tails that had ever been banded at Braddock Bay, and give me also the encounters of any of those birds that had been found and reported again. So out of a total of 10,406 red tails we had banded initially at Braddock Bay, we had 537 encounters, which is a pretty good return rate when you think about it, and keeping in mind that for all of North American banding, it's about 3.4%. Okay. Why is this encounter rate so high? Well, first of all of these birds that were banded were they were not adults. They were less than a year or 2 years old. So in the first year of their life, red-tailed hawks have a mortality rate of 80%. So not many of them are equipped to survive in the first place. So of course, a lot of our counters are found dead for a variety of reasons, and many unknown. After the red tail's first year of life, their mortality rate decreases to about 54%. So they have about 50-50 chance of surviving once they get a little bit of life experience under their belt. Once they reach 2 years and older, their mortality rate decreases even more to about 20%. So when you look at the map I put in this slide here, all the little dots represent a red-tailed hawk that was banded at Braddock Bay. And so it can give you an idea of where some of these birds have traveled to. Now you might notice that there's a different shading to the color of the dots, and some of them are darker red. Many of them are light kind of pinkish color. The darker the shade of the dot is the older the bird. So most of these birds that you're seeing as dots on the map are birds that were less than 2 years old, are young birds. So we look at the encounters, and certainly location is one of those things we're going to be able to learn. Where are these birds going to after we band them? So zoom in a little bit more. We had a very good concentration in the northeast part of the U.S. and of course a lot along the Great Lakes, Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, in the Finger Lakes of New York there too. Zooming in even more, you can see was interesting to see that a lot of the encounters show up along some of our major roadways, and which makes sense. These are a bird. Red tails often are found hanging out on our highways. They hunt along the roadside, which of course is very risky for them. Also, it helps them be more visible, more of a chance of people finding them injured or dead and reporting the bands. So you're going to get more returns from more populated areas as well. But excuse me, it's also interesting to note how far some of these birds have traveled, and they haven't all gone south. Some have gone further north. So I'm going to walk you through just a few of the farthest encounters we've ever had. And the first one would be way up here in Quebec in Canada. and take a look at the dates. Initially, this bird, from what's being displayed here, is the band number, and then the banding date, and then how it was encountered. Sometimes we get more details than just found dead, but most of the time that's what the code says. And then the return or the encounter date and where. So the first bird I'm pointing out here was banded in August and found, unfortunately, found dead way up in Canada just a few weeks later in September. So as a proof that, and you can see some of the other dots are up there towards the north, that these birds are heading north before they may decide to head to a southern winter location. We go a little further west. We went out here all the way in Illinois. This one was found dead as possibly as an adult. We don't know what the age would be at the time of encounter because it was only found as a skeleton. So it obviously had been deceased for quite some time. So there's always a little bit of mystery when you're getting some of these returns. Now we head south to Louisiana. This bird was encountered. It decided to spend the winter there. It looks like it was banded in August and found in February, that following February. And I like this little cluster that I thought found interesting in Florida here along the coast there. All three locations look to be as if these birds were wintering, decided to come winter here and only made it all the way down to Florida just that same winter or winter after it was banded. So interesting to see. Motor vehicle strikes, of course, collisions with buildings. These are highly populated areas down here in southern Florida. So a lot of obstacles for these young birds to navigate. The crazy, they made it down there so far south and unfortunately to meet their demise there. But this is what banding can show us. It can give us a little bit of insight into how far these birds will go and the types of challenges they face in life and what causes of mortality are. So we talk about another thing we can look at as ages of these birds when they're encountered, and this kind of helps calculate some of that mortality rate. A lot of times when we get encounters, sometimes they're unknown age when they're encountered, like the one where you just find the skeleton of the bird. You don't know exactly when it died. But altogether, 60% of the banded birds at the encounters we had were less than 2 years old. And about 40% were older than 2. And then there's a breakdown here to show you just, as they get older, we're less likely to encounter them until many, many years later. Speaking of oldest, this is always a little trivia, and people often ask, how long will a red-tailed hawk live? The oldest on record, according to the banding lab, is a red-tailed hawk that lived to be 30 years and 8 months. That is not one of our birds from Braddock Bay, but it was banded in Michigan back in 1981. But we do have some pretty lengthy life expectancies here for some of the red tails we've banded. And our oldest red tail on record was 24, just about 24 years old. So it gives you an insight of how long, as to how long some of these birds do live once they make it past that first and second year of life. So that's a little summary of some of the banding work that's been done at Braddock Bay. And in terms of what we're going to do looking forward with the information, of course, we're going to continue banding, even if it is not as at the magnitude as it was in the past. We still are banding every summer season and still just, finding new things as we go along. Besides learning about some of the information about distances they travel, habitats they use, causes of mortality, being able to sample a population at one site, it can be very can provide a great opportunity to others. We just started working with a veterinarian at the Cornell University Wildlife Center who works with wild animals as a rehabilitator as well. She works with raptors. Dr. Childs Sanford has been doing a study on red-tailed hawks, and we were able to provide her an avenue where she could do some blood sampling and analysis to get a baseline on some healthy red tails we were encountering, so that can use some of that information and when they're treating patients that come into the wildlife center. So besides learning about some of the traditional things you learn from banding birds, it also is an avenue for others to come in, or other projects where we can actually sample birds from this eastern population. But as you saw, if you remember the graphic in the early on with how many birds we banded over the years, it's not a really good indication of the magnitude of the flights that we see, or what are actually traveling through. So hawk counts, just like our spring and our fall migration counts, this natal dispersal count can provide important information on that over time too. So the next part of this presentation, I'm going to talk to you about some of the historic flights we've had and how our newest project, which is our summer raptor count. So it's also not just red tails, even though it is the majority of red tails. And these are some photos taken by some of our volunteers of some of the red tails and some of the other species we do see during natal dispersal, which are typically also immatures and juvenile birds. We had some great information, some historical season totals in the archives. So they start looking back as I started thinking more and more about this just a few years ago. But we don't really have a breakdown of hourlies for some of those early years. But it's interesting to look at what the potential was and what it could be maybe in the future. What we have seen, what some have documented during the season, the natal dispersal season. I have that in quotes because I don't know that it's really a season, but more like a month. But it is a time period where these birds are traveling through the area. So we have going back into the early 90s, some totals there to show you, as well as the early 2000s. But there's a gap again. But these are numbers that have been tallied by some of our well-known hawk watchers, including Frank Nicoletti, Brett Ewald, Dave Tetlow, who went out on their own time and decided to keep tabs on what was flying over. So of course, the red-tailed hawk numbers are most abundant. As you can see, we got a few broadwings on the flights too. Take a note right now and note the years of what the bald eagle numbers were. So there were a few coming through, and even the turkey vulture numbers. And as we compare to our more current dates, but we've had as many as almost over 7,000 raptors in one season been documented. We do also have some historic day totals in the archives as well, and these also were compiled by some. Dave Tetlow was one of our key counters, Ed Seiler and Mike Tetlow as well, his brother. So very well known, at least locally, as great hawk watchers, also going out on what was considered to be, or thought to be, the best days. So very productive days in some cases. So almost 2,000 red tails on August 17th, 2009. And that still holds as like our day record for the history, but so pretty exciting stuff there. As I mentioned, more recently, we got thinking about this, especially as our banding efforts were not as plentiful or as dynamic as they used to be, and thinking about how valuable the information about the flights could be, especially for future analysis. So in 2018 is really when conversation started amongst several of our volunteers, and why not, if we have this this great tool called Hawk Count. Why aren't we putting in our hourlies? Why aren't we putting in our dailies in that? So everyone can see, and so we can start to use that information and analyze it more scientifically. So we casually did a count. Some of us went out on, again, what we thought were the best days, and also when we were available, and have the first set of hourly totals for some of the August days and a couple of September days in 2018. So we got some numbers in there for that, and you can see the details on Hawk Count there. So certainly after that winter, we said, well, let's give this a shot. I think it's really important that we start to document it more consistently, using a protocol similar to what we use in the spring and what a lot of Hawkwatch sites use, whether they're fall or spring sites across the continent. Make this information, this data, more valid and useful in looking at the red-tailed hawk populations. So our summer raptor count was started in 2019, and it is an all volunteer team effort. And that's something different from us because we're used to having one official counter for the entire spring month. That's their job, to be there every day. So it took some coordinating, but we have such a great crew of volunteers, both experienced and beginner, that decided to join the ranks and give it a go. So it's our first year of organized hourly data collection for the entire month of August. And our main goals really were primarily to document the magnitude of the natal dispersal of these red-tailed hawks through the Braddock Bay area using that consistent data collection protocol. And secondary was to document all the other species because we knew we were getting more than just red tails. And I did want to go through our methodology and describe, how we conduct this count and how much thought goes into making it a consistent protocol. It's really very similar to spring, but with a few differences. So we decided that our daily coverage would be from August 1st through the 31st, unless, we have rainstorms and completely unwatchable weather. Daily coverage takes place for a minimum of 2 hours a day. So we made sure everyone would be committed to at least being on site and counting for at least 2 hours. It typically ends up being more like 3 or 4 hours, but the flights are a little bit different in the summer than they are in the spring, which I'll describe in a bit. And we ask that everyone stays as long as possible. Dealing with volunteers, you have availability that comes into play. So sometimes you have to take what you can get, but I'm happy to say we have had some excellent coverage and dedication by our volunteer crew. We make sure we have at least one, usually 2 volunteers on site to act as counters and one as an observer or an assistant to help with data collection. But we often get more than that, helping out and those who want to actually witness what's going on. We limit the watch sites to one place, which is a difference from our spring counts because we do operate an inland site on days when we get lake breeze or northwest winds or northerly winds off Lake Ontario. This is not as much of a need in the summer. So we basically stick to one site, which is the Hawkwatch at Braddock Bay Park. We collect the weather data and the flight characteristics just like in accordance to the standards that HMANA has set forth. And all raptors determined to be migrating or moving through are recorded, which can be a little tricky because you do, at that time of year, you do have local turkey vultures, bald eagles now, ospreys that hunt and fish and hang out and still live there for over the summer, rest of the summer. So it is a little challenging at times, but we have determined what qualifies as a moving or migrating raptor. Most of our raptors that we're coming through, just about 100% of the red tails, just about, or maybe 99, and some of the other species are juvenile birds. but there occasionally are adults that pop through, especially when it comes to broadwings. We often note a few adult broadwings. So we do make a note if we see any adult birds as opposed to immature. Okay, so data collection, we use a standard HMANA data sheet. We also use and enter our data on Dunkadoo first, if we can do it on site. If we have coverage, we will use that on site and we'll be reporting in real time. Otherwise, it goes into the app at the end of the day. And if you can see all of our daily totals and hourly totals on hawk count. We also, try to get the public interested in. We have our tally board is updated as much as possible so the public can see what we're doing up there on that platform on a nice summer day. As for terms of how it compares to spring migration at Braddock Bay, there are some little differences. Typically, because we're dealing with from the bigger raptors, mostly the bootios, the red-tails, they're a little slower to get started on a summer day. So we're not, typically our day starts at about 10 a.m. People time. That's daylight savings time. And that's when the first birds might be starting to get up, as opposed to spring, especially mid to late spring. We're usually out there counting around 8 a.m., a couple hours earlier. So the day starts a little bit later. The birds are often slower to move through as well, because there's just not, there's not as much urgency to get to a certain place. In the spring, birds are heading north to their breeding territories. They're on a mission. So sometimes even in the worst conditions, you might get a trickle of birds just pushing through it. But these birds definitely, these red tails in particular, are a little slower sometimes to move through. We may be waiting for them to pass more so than we do in the springtime. We don't get really big kettles of raptors. We get some broadwings, but our kettles are not as big as you get during the peak of migration in the springtime. But you will have groups that come through like this photo of red tails here. And a lot of times though, they're more streaming and just onesies and twosies in a steady stream than a big kettle. The duration of the day is usually shorter, and it has a lot to do with summer weather. Often because being close to Lake Ontario, when you have nice cool breezes that'll kick in if you don't have a strong southerly wind to push birds towards us. So we're usually only counting maybe 4 to 6 hours maximum. And that's going to get us the bulk of what's moving through. We also see just a little less species diversity in the summertime. So a few things are left out, like golden eagles and rough-legged hawks. So the diversity isn't there, but that's not necessarily a downer. It's actually can be very beneficial, especially to people who are starting to learn identification. So let's talk a little bit about some of the results we've had so far. And as a key component to this count, and it wouldn't be possible without our volunteers and our team. So it's good to note what we've had for coverage here. And we covered the entire month of August, all 3 years. We actually included a couple of July days in the 2 previous years because the conditions were just lining up to be perfect and we had pretty decent days. And as I mentioned earlier, we often start to see dispersal start about mid-July. So as a comparison of the total count hours we've put in the longest day that we've had is, hasn't really passed much more than 6 hours there. So most of our days are 3 hours or less, with a few more than that. We managed to have a crew of more than a dozen volunteers each year, which has been very helpful in getting this amount of coverage. So we wouldn't be able to do without them. We have experience level ranges from beginner to experts, and we do pair up our counters with who are beginners or feel less competent with more experienced people. And everyone has given feedback that it's just a great way to learn Raptor ID, especially for beginners, and to get comfortable with even just a few species. You really get to know your red tails, of course, during the summer seasons. To keep it fun and keep people motivated, we do have some recognitions at the end of the season, and we do a couple of contests at the beginning where we hold predictions. We have everyone guess what's going to be like the biggest day, what our total number of raptors will be, and what the total number of red tails will be. And then we give prizes out at the end for those who come the closest. So it's just a fun way to keep people involved and maintain our coverage, which has been absolutely great so far. But really, it's about the birds too, of course, and I know most people are interested in seeing how many of these birds we are seeing during this time of year. So our top 4 species are red tails, turkey vultures, broad-winged hawks, and bald eagles. It makes up the majority of the count. But there's the list, and you can see that we have, a trickle of a couple of accipiters come through, a few falcons here and there, and the rare red-shouldered hawks. We have had, up until this season, 12 possible species. We added a 13th this summer, which was exciting, with the Swainson's hawk. And to my knowledge, this has been the first Swainson's hawk that has ever been seen on this count. It may have been Swainson's in our area in the summer, but not tallied on this raptor count, this type of raptor count. So that was pretty exciting to add that species there. Now, remember what our bald eagle numbers were in the early years in our historic data. We barely got close to 40 or 50, and now we're easily seeing over 100 eagles just during natal dispersal time. And these are all young, immature birds like you see in the photo there. It gets a little challenging to count the eagles now because we do have locals in the area, mostly adults by that time of year. But these are all individuals that have been noted to be passing through and not wandering around and just hunting out in the bay, fishing. So it's exciting to see that number has changed for sure. Our big day results, everybody always likes to hear about big days. I know you're all here talking about big broad-wing days right now because of fall migration, but our biggest days come on the hottest and most humid days, typically with steady southwest winds. So there's the lineup there of our top 4 species for each year. Hundreds of red tails in just a few hours, which is really exciting. I noted that the 2020 count also included 1 Cooper's hawk, and the 2019 count also included a Cooper's hawk and 2 osprey. So it's a far stretch from the biggest day heads on record back in 2009 when 2,725 raptors were tallied, but things may have changed since then, and that's kind of the bummer about this, is that we don't have a continuous documentation of the flights. So it's really speculation on what's happened between the early 2000s and today, since 20 years. But one of the things that's happened is West Nile virus certainly kicked in around 1999 was the first it arrived in North America, and so since then there have been some big outbreaks over the last couple decades and it certainly is one thing that affects our larger raptors and red tails in particular. So perhaps that has taken a toll in different breeding seasons. So this is why we want to continue to document the natal dispersal here so that we have a better idea of the trends, and then we can analyze and compare to what's going on in the environment around us. So with only 3 years worth of information, of data, consistent data, but there's not a lot that we can do to analyze it just yet. We don't feel like we have that much, but I have started looking and trying and using the data to check for patterns. And one of the things I just did from this past season was look at our good days, quote unquote, any day that was over 200 birds, and compared and see what were the similarities there. What is bringing us these good flights? Some of it is what we expected, and some of it we were starting to kind of solidify to what we thought was happening, and maybe some of it is new to discover. So we know, just looking at our big days, southwest winds are still best, especially when you have that to start the day. Sometimes if you have it southwest wind, which rarely happens up here midday, even then birds are still too far inland to get up to the lakeshore. So we're not really seeing many counts when the winds shift that way. And a lot of it depends on another couple of factors too. So southwest is best, especially to start the day. Westerly component, of course, also seems to be important. So even on August 23rd, we had start with northwest winds. There was still that westerly component, which was pushing birds along the lakeshore. And we had a decent day, as long as it doesn't turn straight north or northeast to push them away from us. We got a pretty decent day's count. Cloud cover definitely plays a role, and this is probably not anything new to you hawk watchers out there, but we started to pay closer attention to this summer. Cloud cover can be super helpful in helping spot birds, but if you don't have any birds to get up there to your spot, to your site to spot, then it definitely is a detriment to your count. For example, my data count one day this August, and we had beautiful southerly winds, southwest winds, about 10 to 12 miles per hour. Would have been an awesome spring day. It was solid 100% cloud cover all the way around us. And I saw 0 migrating or moving raptors for the entire 3 hours I was there. So even though we had the southwest winds, solid bank of clouds is not going to help bring them our way. These birds really do look for the thermal activity too in the summertime to just get them motivated to get up. And you can say cloud cover did play a part in some of the days here towards the end of the day. As the clouds break up, they get super high thermals, and in blue sky is very difficult to spot birds. So the flight tends to slow down or become hard to see at that point in the day. And it kind of goes along with, as we get hotter and hotter throughout the day, birds get higher and less visible as well. These were some of our hottest days. Our temperatures were 26 degrees or higher on these days. So these were some of our hottest August days. And I also started to observe that some of the birds coming over were slowing down more about midday, about noon, 1 o'clock, and taking advantage of the fields nearby and stopping for lunch or taking advantage to look at the potential for a possible meal while they're out wandering around. So we did kind of notice some lulls and observe some hunting behavior of individuals more so than sometimes during our spring counts where they're just moving through. So, taking the information, taking that data is in analyzing, looking at it for patterns and what it's telling us is all part of the game here and part of the purpose of doing these counts there. So looking ahead, we are continuing with the count, and encourage anyone who actually lives locally, if you're interested in hawk watching in the summer and want to become part of our raptor count, you're welcome to join the ranks, and certainly contact us for more information on that. We continue to band, as I mentioned, as long as we can to keep building that database. what can we learn from these counts? And that's kind of, some of it's a little open-ended, but one of the things we want to know is how are the counts changing over time, and what are the factors that might be affecting that. We'll also love to hear if there are any other sites that are experiencing natal dispersal counts like that in the late summer, and compare with what you're seeing out there. So we also Braddock Bay is a great site to provide opportunities for others to do their research, whether it be with banding raptors or using our count data, or performing your own counts and comparing as well. Just like with every Hawkwatch site out there, the scientific data collection is a key component to conservation, but also education. They provide such a great opportunity for people to get out and learn about the world around them, learn about raptors, other birds, and the habitats. So we're going to try to take more initiative to developing a few more programs in the summer. We do a lot of our education in the spring, but we certainly have an avenue here for more education opportunities in the summer months too. Okay, so that is about what I have to present to you about our natal dispersal today. Wanted to just want everybody to keep in mind that we are a nonprofit, and we rely very heavily on donations and memberships to help support our work. There's some fun ways that you can support us as well. We have an Adopt a Hawk program, which is a symbolic sponsorship of one of our banded birds, be it a red tail or bald eagle. So that's one way to support our banding program, and the birder band program as well, and our wish list. It's all on our website. Please check it out, and you'll find some information about the summer raptor counts there, including our full reports and also our spring activities too. So hopefully you'll run over there and check it out. And I want to thank everyone from HMANA and everyone who tuned in today to listen to this presentation. And I hope everyone has a great fall season. And now I guess we have time for some questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Daena. That was excellent. That was very cool just to see your data. It goes to show you, we have a lot to learn about migration and the movements of these birds kind of outside of the traditional migration windows that we associate with spring and fall. So you just mentioned in one of your last slides that you're interested in learning about this phenomenon at other sites. Do you know of any offhand? I haven't heard of any other. I know you're kind of perfectly situated to see that on the lakeshore. Right. Do you know of other sites?
I have not heard of any other sites that have seen or documented. Once in a while, Derby Hill will report a good day in August when they are seeing a lot of juvenile red tails. They tend to have better days on southeast winds because they're on the eastern end. I did see a comment from Vic Berardi, who's out at the start of their season out there, their site in Illinois, right? That they had some, a lot of juvenile red tails, but not for the length of time. And that's one of the things that makes Braddock Bay so unique, is I feel like we're the only site that's really documented it in any way, or that observes it in such magnitude. But who knows, there could be other sites out there that, maybe no one's ever paid attention or bothered, I feel like it has to be happening somewhere else, but we don't know. So
yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, and I was kind of thinking of telemetry possibilities, and then I saw your band recovery data, and I was blown away. I think most banding operations probably don't have as impressive a return, so that was really interesting to see how far south those birds are going.
Right. I think doing some telemetry would be useful, and just to see also what types of habitats they're being drawn to, or how long they're staying in a certain area, and which birds are Are they deciding to migrate south for the winter? How far south? Yeah, there's a lot of questions there. I think one of the big questions is out there is where are these birds coming from before they get to us? I mean, we have some, speculation, they're coming from, of course, southern New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, those territories there, but because they're pretty much eastern birds. But how far away are they really coming from is a big question.
Yeah, that would be great to have a handle on. Sandra is wondering, what's the count per year taking into account effort? So she said you showed a graph of total birds banded each year. What would the graph look like as average number of birds banded per day or per net hour for that year?
Yeah, that's a tough one to put together because we just don't have documentation of that hourly, the number of hours all our banders have put in, and it's not a consistent thing that's been recorded. In recent years, we have asked our banders to keep a documentation of the number of hours they're spending in the blind banding so that we can get a better idea of, number of birds per hour, that kind of thing. We do see sometimes, just observing the flights and our banding success on certain days, sometimes our banding operation stops before the flight stops because birds are either not as responsive or they're getting up too high to be responsive to the lures in the station. So again, it's another reason why you can't use just the banding data to really assess the numbers of what's coming through the total flight there. So
okay, thanks. Another question we have is from Mary. She's wondering, what are the measurement and weight differences between adult and immature, male and female red tails from your banding records?
Oh, I wish I had that stuff in front of me, but it varies a lot. And the tough thing about red-tailed hawks is there's a lot of overlap in size between male and females. And they can vary between the 900 to 1200 gram range in weight, I believe. Usually the smaller end of the scale is your males and the upper end is the females. But there's a lot of overlap in between. So the banding lab does not allow us to positively sex these birds in the hand because of that, and they all go down as unknown. Because of the overlap in both weight and wing chord. So it's really hard to tell you how many we're getting, what's the difference in males and females. It's so much variation there, which makes it challenging. We did actually have a study going on back in the mid 2000s or so, where we were trying to do some work on sexing red tails in the field with DNA analysis. So we would take a blood sample to send out for analysis so we positively identify the sex of the bird and then see if there was any correlation in the measurements. And we didn't really get anything very definitive. We probably needed to sample that a little bit more, but it just was like another example of how much variation there is in these birds and species. So it's tough.
And in their plumage as well, which leads to the next question that Allie has. Have any unique or unusual plumage variations of red tails been documented during the summer count, or do they always show typical eastern red-tailed hawk plumage?
Yeah, most of them are typical. You occasionally get birds that have a little more reddish in the tail, even though it's a banded tail. I know that we have captured I think 3 dark morph red tails, but I believe those were all spring birds. So cool. Yeah, we really don't see too much variation within the species, and they're so variable, these red-tailed hawks. we are, we actually were hoping to to have a dark morph for the Red-tailed Hawk project study that's going on, but yeah, pretty much they're very, very similar. They can be some really light birds and really dark birds, but not any of the distinct subspecies.
Okay. Okay, thanks. And from Facebook, Rob is asking, do most of these birds seem to be using the wine country habitat along the I-90 corridor?
Oh, sure. A lot of them do. They probably, can't tell you how many times you're driving that I-90, which is the thruway, then you can see just so many of them sitting along the roadside. You certainly see more during the late summer as well. Sure, they'll be found along I-90, along the Finger Lakes, all throughout the Finger Lakes there as well. But they're so spread out and so numerous that time of year. Red tails are so adaptable that as long as there's good, open areas for them to soar and hunt and good perching sites for them to take cover, they can be found just about anywhere.
Yeah,
except for
they're not picky.
Yeah, they're really. That's probably one of my reasons why I like them so much. They're one of my favorite species because almost anywhere you go, you can find red tails. They're like that old familiar face.
Yeah. And everybody's seen them pretty much, cities, no matter where you live in the country, you're bound to see them. Another question from Jill from Facebook is, are they ever banded in the nest? I know this isn't a nesting project, but if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, no, we haven't done any nest banding. That would be helpful though if there are others out there who are doing that, and we always say we could get somebody on a nest banding project. Maybe some of them would show up at our banding stations and that would give us a better idea where they're coming from, but that's a pretty widespread area to sample from, and it would take a lot of resources. So no nest banding here.
Okay, well, we have one more question from Yvonne. She's wondering, could natal latitude analysis be done to help determine where the juvenile birds are coming from? I guess maybe
that's always,
like blood sampling.
I think that's been done with feather sampling, I believe. And I think that might be useful, although I'm not, and it would be wonderful to have someone get in on a project like that. That might give us the best idea of where these birds are coming from, but they might, I don't know how specific you can get with the latitude. I'm not well versed in the type of analysis that has to be done and how that's read, but I know it has been done with other species. But that would be a great project to take on to see.
Put on the list for someday. Well, we can't thank you enough for speaking with us today, Daena. I certainly learned a lot. It was fun getting a glimpse. I remember hearing about this project years ago, 10 or so years ago. So it's really fun to see how the summer raptor count has grown and developed, and your database has really grown.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand it back to Josh for a minute to close us out, but thanks so much, and thanks to everybody for joining us.
Great, thank you, Julie, and thank you, Daena, again. What a great talk. A lot of great engagement both on Facebook as well as here on Zoom, so thank you again, and best of luck to both this project as well as your future counting over at Braddock Bay. So thanks again. As always, we're looking ahead to the future, and for October, we're trying to secure Dr. Dave Oliar, who will talk to us about the Raptor Population Index, which is a very important project related not only to HMANA, but the hawk count data that we rely on from migration sites like Braddock Bay and well beyond. So stay tuned for that. If you were not able to join us for our Raptor conference earlier this summer, we did have a talk centered on Raptor Population Index, the RPI, and it was really wonderful. So there will be a version of that, and there's a lot of great things happening with RPI right now based on some very great donations that have come in and updates to things like their website, and new data that they're analyzing right now. So stay tuned. We will be sending that out through our normal newsletter channels as well as on Facebook. So stay tuned. Thank you again, Daena, and everybody else for joining us on behalf of HMANA. We hope you guys have a great rest of your month, and stay tuned on Hawk Count. There's some amazing data coming in. It's September in the Midwest, and the broadwings are moving. So keep an eye on that data, and we will see everybody next month. Thanks, everybody.